What about business affected by Europe? I mean, you could go on for the rest of the day, I'm sure, about how Europe has affected British business. But for the business people who watch this, how have they been affected? And more importantly, I suppose, how do you think they will be affected?
Most companies don't have anything to do with Europe. Your economy, and excuse me speaking as a bit of a geeky economist just for a moment, your economy, broadly speaking, the United Kingdom, 90% of it has got nothing to do with Europe at all. It's the butcher, the baker, the candlestick maker, the cab driver, the local school, the corner shop. This is really what makes up your economy. And here we have all these rules and regulations about what we can do, what we can sell, so on and so forth, which pertain across 27 countries. But your average Joe running his small business hasn't got anything to do with Europe. And so he doesn't want to meet the vast expense of meeting these European regulations. And we're largely a service economy rather than a manufacturing economy. And only 8% of service is actually cross-border. So we have all these thousands and thousands of rules and regulations which don't pertain to the individual trying to run a business. We have a perfectly good constitutional monarchy, a democracy, a common law system, liberty of contract, which I'm a true believer in. I was in Washington just before, Chris, talking about the liberty of contract. If you and I make a contract, whether it's an employment contract or a business contract, in a free society with a legal system, that should be enough. We shouldn't have a politician interfering in how we do that. Who am I to tell you, if you've got a small business, who you should employ, how long you should employ them for, what hours they can work, what you should pay, should you give them a pension or not? What is this to do with me, incidentally, with no business experience at all, which is where these rules and regulations come from. So we're getting energy policy, fishing policy, agricultural policy, employment policy. All these policies are coming from an unelected bureaucracy in Brussels, and they're stifling business. Sometimes I wonder if it isn't a Chinese conspiracy. I think it might be a Chinese conspiracy, because we go on ladling more tax and more regulation, stifling enterprise and entrepreneurship in this country, and Europe generally, in Western Europe, that we actively encourage manufacturing to go to China.
But I mean, being part of Europe must help us in the companies that do business abroad, surely. I mean, it frees up trade routes, doesn't it? It makes it easier to import and export goods and services from to and from Europe. We've had Siemens now choosing Hull as the preferred area to build the wind farms or build the wind turbines. That must be something to do with being part of Europe.
Well, I would argue not as an economist. No, I don't see that any more reason that Siemens are building wind turbines, and don't get me started on that subject. They're building wind turbines in Hull because they think that's a commercial decision, and that's fine. But we don't have political union with Japan, been making Honda here very successfully for years. So the notion that you need political union in order to trade or interact is simply not so. It's something that's peddled by Europhiles, but of course it's simply not true. I mean, we've had Ford in Europe, Ford's an American, GM owned Volvo. We've had this interglobal interface with business and manufacturing for years and years and years. The implication we need political union for it is actually economically illicit.
You're a member in the European Parliament of several committees, aren't you? Including I need to get it right, Women and Gender Equality
That's right.
Committee.
Yes.
Which sounds like an interesting one, because you've made some interesting remarks about women.
Yes. One of the problems that we have with this committee is they don't really understand how small businesses work, or medium-sized businesses. Now, if you bring in rules and regulations which say that you have to give X maternity leave and paternity leave and all this sort of thing, the knock-on effect, and I made this point quite controversially in 2004, the actual knock-on effect is that small businesses will stop employing women of childbearing age. And that when I said this in 2004, we've now seen the statistics over the last 5 years, and that's exactly what's happened. Because anybody watching this program running a small business will know. They'll think to themselves, I'd love to employ this young woman. She's really switched on. She's really good. She's really articulate. But if she leaves to have a baby, there's only 4 of us in the business. That's 25% of my workforce who don't have to say if they're coming back. So the whole legislative procedure is stacked against a small business. So what they do is actually discriminate against, covertly, young women in the workplace and employ women who have grown-up children. And I think, which is fine, that's okay too, but I think that's a great shame. And a number of women have said to me, I would like to contract out, coming back to this liberty of contract. They would say, I want this job, I want to come and work for you, I think I've got a lot to offer, Can I contract out? So if I decide to have a family and a baby, I will just go and you can employ somebody else to replace me. And the number of young women, I have a huge postbag on this, the number of young women that write to me and say they don't want this protection, they don't want it, it's actually hampering their employment. But of course, trying to get that explained to some of the ladies on my committee with absolutely no commercial experience whatsoever is almost impossible.
It's interesting. I mean, I've got some quotes here, and I just wonder whether, because I've got the childbearing age quote here, and I wonder whether you think that you are too often either misquoted or your quote is taken out of context. Because, I mean, it says here, Godfrey Bloom told the media, no self-respecting small businessman with a brain in the right place would ever employ a lady of childbearing age. Which, if you read it in that context, means
yes,
you're just a male chauvinist, aren't you, really?
They just cut off the bit, and they cut off the bits before it and the bits afterwards.
But does that happen?
Under current legislation?
Yeah.
Yes, well, of course that's what they do, that's politics. And the bit, and in fact, when I first said that, and there was a big furore that came in all dear, oh dear, oh dear for a couple of days, and then India Night led in the Sunday Times just 2 days later. Actually, I've now read everything that Godfrey said. And he's actually right. And her line in the middle page was, actually, Godfrey, you're right. And even the Daily Mail said, you're a horrible, nasty little piece of work, but you're right.
So they don't like you, but they appreciate
well, we
you.
hate you, but you're right.
Do you have a favourite committee?
I suppose I have to say it is probably the Women's Gender Equality Committee because it's so wonderfully Gilbertian. It's just fabulous. It's straight out of the Peter Simple column. You couldn't invent it. But every committee is extremely humorous, gallows humour mostly. But I kid you not when I talk about the standardisation of spirit bottles and lavatory seats and all the rest of it, because this actually does happen. But I remember spirit bottles once. We had 125 different shapes of spirit and wine bottles in the European Union. It was decided that there were too many. They wanted to bring it down to 60. And I said, well, who's confused? Who's confused about all these? As long as it says how much is in it, X pints or whatever it happens to be on the bottle, you don't really mind. Anyway, everybody was confused, apparently, so we had to bring it down to 60. And the rapporteur was a man who's the chairman of for those who don't know the rapporteur, a man called Monsieur Thubon, who immediately, of course, worked out what the French vineyards actually needed, and that was the 60, and everything else was got rid of.
What was the business that you started? What was the business that you were in?
Well, I was a fund manager. One of the other things I did was a fund manager in the city, managing billions, and I thought perhaps I might be able to do this for myself, for a, hate to use the word, a boutique-y sort of arrangement with clients. And I sat down there, having been institutional man for sort of nearly 30 years, with some second-hand furniture and a pencil and an empty filing cabinet, wondering whether I'd made the most ghastly mistake. And it was successful. It's not wildly successful. I claim no great entrepreneurial skills, but we did get up to sort of employing, I don't know, 12, 13, 14 people. It's still going. I sold the business on, and so yeah, it was quite successful. It was a very interesting period of my life, and I learned a lot. I wouldn't let anybody be a politician until they'd started a small business, or at least worked at a small business for 5 years. And I've got friends of mine who are lawyers, Oxford-educated lawyers, my sort of age, who couldn't begin to tell you how we're governed. They think they do. Broadly, they think Europe's a wonderful thing, isn't it? Wonderful. Sun-dried tomatoes. We've got a little place in Provence, it's absolutely marvellous. Sunshine. You say, there's no way of life marvellous, and Charlotte's going to school there, yeah. But they don't know how they're governed. They haven't a clue how they're governed. Unbelievable ignorance. And so if we can bring information back, more people can get information. They might just have a little bit of a think. I think they're already thinking. I think they're already getting it.
Do you think Cameron is strong enough to take us out of Europe?
No, he doesn't want to come out of Europe.
Do you think anybody would take us out of Europe? Do you think any Prime Minister that we would have in the near future would have the nerve to do it?
I think probably not. But what I do think, when it starts to collapse, if you think historically, you take a longer-term historical perspective, there is no empire, and we're talking about an empire. The European Union is an empire that has been successful. It's inefficient, it's corrupt, it's Byzantine, it's Ottoman. The historical perspectives are all there for everybody to see. These things generally collapse of their own accord, and the European Union will be no exception.
Well, it's a great pleasure to meet you, and thank you for spending time with us. Godfrey Bloom.